Good evening, everybody. My name is Doug Mitchell, and I have the great privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Glacier National Park Conservancy, the park's official nonprofit philanthropic partner. And it is such an honor tonight to be joined by one of Glacier Park's most impactful leaders, Jami Belt. As I mentioned, an Ohio native, Jami got to Glacier just as fast as she could, and our community is all the better for it. Jami moved to Montana in 1999 and began right away the work of helping visitors explore the magic of Glacier Park and the larger Crown of the Continent ecosystem as the program director at one of our great nonprofit partners, the Glacier Institute. She began working at the Crown of the Continent Research Learning Center in 2006 as the Citizen Science Program Manager. And since that time, Jami has brought energy, commitment, and innovation that has grown the Citizen Science Program into one that serves as a model both in this region and all across the country. Jami holds a bachelor's degree in neuroscience from Miami University of Ohio and a master's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Montana, where she was a Boone and Crockett Fellow. Thanks for joining us tonight, Jami.
Thank you.
And Jami has also set a record, by the way, friends, for the longest distance traveled to join a Glacier Conversation. She is at home in West Glacier tonight, but Jami, you were just in Africa. Tell us a little about that trip.
Sure, yeah. I had the opportunity to go to Uganda to help raise money for water conservation or water development projects in gorilla habitat to help with the conservation of gorillas. So it was pretty magical experience.
And you did so by running just a little bit of a distance.
I ran a 50K, yeah, around a big lake with 8 Ugandans and a fellow from Greece and then another from the Netherlands. And then I got to run the last 7K with a couple little girls and a woman, which was pretty exciting because they don't usually have a lot of athletic engagement as women in Uganda. So we held hands and ran the last 7K together, which was pretty neat.
That is a truly special experience, and you bring special experiences and engagement like that to Glacier Park every day. And we are so thankful here at the Conservancy and as Glacier lovers to be able to hear from you tonight about your work in the Citizen Science Program, where you've been, and where the program's going. And I know you've been nice enough to put together a special presentation for us. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to you and let you take it away, Jami.
Okay, sounds great. Well, thanks again for having me and for everybody attending on this nice evening. So yeah, I'm going to walk you through what we do with our program, some of what we've learned over the years since we started it in 2006, and then what's coming up next and how you can get involved. So let me get my screen shared with you all. Okay, is it there? Can you see it?
It is up.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So as I mentioned, with the support from the very beginning of the Glacier Conservancy and also the Glacier National Park Volunteer Associates, who gave some seed money early on, and then many others along the way, we have been able to run our Citizen Science Program since 2006. And it's fun that at this point, I don't feel like I have to give a huge description of what that term means. It's also called community science now in many circles, and we're kind of moving toward that term. But so community science or citizen science essentially means engaging the public in research, engaging people in scientific research who don't necessarily come from a scientific background, as a way to increase the capacity and geographic scope and replicability of science. So we can get a lot more done by tapping into people who are already out there, who are already eyes and ears in the field. And citizen science runs the gamut from a lot of wildlife and ecological applications. You can look at pictures from telescopes and try to identify distant meteorological celestial bodies, and look at earthquakes. You can put a seismometer in your basement and help to more pinpoint how seismic activity happens. So there's a lot of really cool applications for citizen science. We were really lucky to be kind of on the front end of citizen science here in Glacier with the vision of my then supervisor, and then our former biologists, so Sally Heil and Steve Gnidek, who said, we have a lot of people here. We could tap into that enthusiasm for this place and start learning more about some of the stuff that we don't have the resources to do. We have a small team of biologists, and we have 1 million acres and a lot of really important wildlife and other ecological issues to track. We need help. So that was how the citizen science program started way back then. Okay, So basically what it means then to get people engaged in citizen science is we look at what topics we have in the park, what management issues we have that are a good fit. We tend to select organisms, wildlife, or types of issues that are charismatic, because you want people to be engaged. You can't really get people excited about something like nematodes, for example. So you have charismatic species and things that represent the health of the ecosystem. So I'll talk about a couple of our long-term projects and how they help us to get a pulse on the integrity of different ecosystem types, so that we can see and kind of use those as umbrellas to see how things are doing for the rest of the park and the things that live in those same ecosystem types. And one thing that's really cool, and I guess just backing up, so what we do then to get people engaged is we do recruiting, we put the word out there in press releases about the species that we're interested in monitoring. I do all the research design along with the people who are specialists in that species or topic here in the park, and work with management to figure out what our management goals are. And then we recruit and train the public, usually with a in-person training session where they come and learn about the species for a day, go out into the field and practice the survey techniques. And then once people are up and running with the survey techniques, we kind of set them loose with the idea that people are already out hiking to many of these places we need to get surveys done already. And so they can go out there with a little bit of extra equipment and spend a little bit of extra time and come back with data that we would otherwise not be able to get to help monitor species population status and health and things like that. And what it looks like for the participants then is, generally speaking, we are asking them to go to a beautiful spot and spend a little bit of extra time with binoculars or spotting scopes, scanning the landscape to look for wildlife. And it turns out that when you slow down and look hard for wildlife, you see it, and you see some pretty incredible things that are going on out there in the park. And what's really cool, in my opinion, that is new for us is that we have finally entered the 21st century and transitioned to mobile data collection. So that's something that we've been working really hard on for the last few years, is to develop apps and databases corresponding with those apps and web maps and all the things that go into creating digital displays out of the data that we collect. And that has been incredible, because it's really allowed us to build our capacity to get data in a more succinct way and have it be more accurate as it comes from people. We can get really cool photos, geographic points. And so it's really increased our capacity for what we can do with our science. So I'm going to start by talking about the project that was our flagship, our beginning with citizen science here, which is our common loon citizen science monitoring. So for anybody who's not familiar, this is one of the most beautiful creatures on Earth. The common loon is a relative of penguins that are very long-lived in the taxonomic record. And we are fortunate here in Glacier to be on the very southern edge of their range. They're kind of lousy with loons up in Canada, but we just have a small population here in Northwest Montana. And in Glacier, we host about 25% of the state's population of what is left. They used to go further south, but now this is what remains in this part of the world. And so back in the 80s, there was some concern because of the effects that people saw with DDT on other species. So loons are a fish-eating bird, so they're at the top of their food chain. They spend a lot of time, trying to feed these little tiny chicks, so they eat a ton of fish throughout the summer. And as a top-level predator, what happened back in the 80s and prior to that was people started seeing the effects of DDT on those birds, thinning eggshells and causing problems with reproduction. And that was something that caused concern for the species in Montana. So the park, along with many others in the state, started monitoring this species to see how they were doing and see if there was any effects happening. And that the primary way in which that was being done was through a single day event called Loon Days that would happen across the region of Northwest Montana where loons are present, where you go out one day in July and count loons. And so Glacier's biologist, Steve Gnidek, who I mentioned earlier, at that time started that effort and basically just rounded up whoever he could find, backcountry rangers, biologists who were going out, law enforcement people, and got a good count for a long time, but started to wonder, what are you missing if you only go out once? And if you don't train people, it seems pretty obvious, right? You got this beautiful black and white bird, but they're not that easy to find. They're not that easy to identify when they're not right in your face, like in this picture. So he wanted to see if they could get better data by training people and by getting people to do a more season-long effort. And so that's when I entered the picture. They got funding to start the project as a pilot effort in 2005 from the Glacier National Park Volunteer Associates. And then in 2006, after we had seen that a lot of people came out of the woodwork to help out with that project, we decided to institutionalize it and run it in a full season, and got a lot of people. I think at that first year that we fully did it for the season, we had 70 people come out to start looking at common loons. And so what we do with this project is we train people on how to identify the species, and they go out to 45 lakes throughout the park at least 3 times a season so that we can get a better count of how this bird is doing and how it's persisting throughout time. And the reason this is important that we spend so much time on the species is, for one, so as I mentioned, loons eat a lot of fish. They eat about a literal ton of fish throughout the course of the summer trying to feed their chicks. And so they really need clean, healthy lake water for that to happen. And they're very sensitive to disturbance, so they need to be free from a lot of recreational or disturbance from infrastructure and things like that. So they're a great sentinel for how an ecosystem like those lake ecosystems is doing. And those 2 little chicks on the back of that loon there represent, for us on average, 1/3 of our park population each year. So our average number of chicks produced in Glacier, so in the entire park each year, is about 6 or 7. So each one of those little tiny fluff balls is critical to maintaining the persistence of the population into the future. And so here is what we've learned over the years by monitoring the species. We kind of went into this project thinking, okay, we're going to learn a little bit about a population status. And so you can see here from this graph, we have definitely learned that. We can see that we do have that same average. We haven't seen a giant increase in our average. We went from about 5.5 at the beginning when we started in 2006, and now our average is a little closer to high 6, just about 7. So we haven't seen what we would call an increase in the population, but we can see that they're remaining pretty steady. We're seeing a little bit of range expansion, so attempts to breed in new locations where they haven't bred in the past. And we just see that this is a really important species to keep a pulse on so that we can see if anything does change. It's very hard to recover a species that small if you see any kind of a dip. Other things that we learned that we weren't expecting was we've learned about chick hatch dates. We've learned about nest locations, about common sources of disturbance. We've been able to implement management actions when there, for example, are fires where they need to dip out of lakes. We can ask them to steer clear of lakes where there's still chicks that are dependent on their parents and things like that. So we've been able to get a very large breadth of information from having people going out to these beautiful lakes, so 45 beautiful lakes throughout the park 3 times a year. And so what I have there in the lower corner is our Loons on the Edge story map. And I wasn't quite sure the best way to share these things with you. I don't have time to go into this, but if you want to learn more about some of the cooler things we've learned about habitat and the change over time and hatch dates and things like that, I suggest that you go look at our Loons on the Edge story map. That is a hyperlink. So Andrew, I know you have the presentation, so if there's a way to send that out in the chat so people can access that on their own, that would be great. And then another thing that's been really interesting and fun to expand in the last few years. So we have been partnering for quite a few years. I think I started in 2011 partnering with the Blackfeet tribe to look at the loons on their tribal lands. And the reason for that was because people started reporting to us, we've got breeding loons on some of these little pothole lakes right outside the park. Typical loon habitat is a little bit more like what we see here in Glacier. It's these, kind of big, long lakes with lots of edge habitat, boreal forest all around the whole thing. And here we are on the Blackfeet Reservation in these like potholes with prairie all around it with loons breeding. And so it's something that people are very interested in because not only is it atypical, but it represents a range expansion to the east that is not well understood. So we've been partnering with the Blackfeet tribe we've had interns in the past years. We've tried a handful of different models. And now the thing that seems to be the most enriching and working the best for both of us is working with the Pikuni Land Corps. So that's what that picture in the upper left there is. That was last year's Pikuni Land Corps crew. And we trained them to identify loons, to monitor them using our mobile or collect data using our mobile data collection app. And then they go out to lakes throughout the Blackfeet Reservation and do an annual survey for the greater state common loon working group so that we can keep tracking that. And then last year we had the opportunity, and I think we'll be doing it again this year, to work with the Blackfeet Native Science Field Center with 4th to 6th grade girls as part of the Sci Girls, which is a PBS program. So it's a Sci Girls effort to get citizen science more widespread in national parks. And so we got to train those girls on how to identify loons and monitor them. And it just so happened that they were simultaneously with a Pikuni land course. So the girls they came a couple days before, so they trained the bigger kids on how to monitor loons and then did these presentations for them. So that's what you see in that picture there on the lower right.
And Jamie, maybe we had a couple of loon specific questions. Any lucky, maybe we can go to those couple of questions before we leave loons.
Sure, absolutely. Gary wanted to know, Jamie, why such a small number of chicks given the number of pairs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, you would expect with that many pairs that we could get quite a few more chicks each year. They only produce 2, so only 2 chicks per pair. And not every lake is suitable breeding habitat. And for the ones that are suitable breeding habitat, the success rate's pretty low and the survival rate of chicks is quite low as well. It's about 25%. So it's a lot, and they're very slow to reproduce. They're just really not fast breeders is kind of how they've evolved.
And then 2 questions from Eric and Tanya. One has there been an effect of non-native fish introductions into Glacier on the loon populations?
That is a great question. I don't think we can answer that because we don't have the historical data to look at prior to when there were non-native fish. But we do know that some studies have been done that have looked at the cascading effects of having those different fish types and how they overall reduce the biodiversity of a lake, because they are basically reducing the different niches that can be filled by fishes of different sizes that, either at the bottom or the top of the water column. So we're really excited. It just so happens that a couple of the prime spots where the native fish restoration projects are occurring are also some of our most important breeding lakes for loons. So we're really excited to see how that all sorts out. And so far, so good. It looks like we're still having pretty good breeding success on those lakes and hope to see that expand.
And then second, from the Mullinses, do you interact with the Cornell Lab eBird app to track the loons or other birds?
That's a good question. We don't specifically send our data to eBird. We work with the state. So the app that we developed, we launched in the whole state. I'm now the Common Loon Working Group chair. So we've been able to work together to have one single database. So the state, we're working to get collaborative data, but we haven't worked with eBird. But I will talk about eBird a little bit later.
Okay, I think that's it for now.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks, Jamie.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I just also wanted to share that as part of the Common Loon Working Group, which I mentioned is a network of all of the agencies within the state that collaborate on common loon conservation. We have been doing some banding of just a small number of loons each year. We learn a lot about survival of adults and chicks, about places where there are bottlenecks, where there's difficulty with survival or reproduction. And so I'm throwing this out there because this is about citizen science. One thing that anybody can do is if they're at a lake where they see a loon and have binoculars, you can spend a little extra time seeing if you can see bands on those loons' legs, and then send that information back to us, because anytime we get a resighting on those bands, we can look at where that loon was first banded, so where it dispersed to, because they find a new lake from the one they hatched at to go find their own breeding territory. We can see sometimes where they're migrating to, whether or not they survived, and things like that. So if you want to learn more about loon banding, again, I hyperlinked a video, one of the Glacier Science video series that were done by Melissa Slottick that I think are excellent. And so if you share that in the chat, people can look at that loon banding video to see more about how loon banding works and what the goals are. Okay, so I'm going to move on from loons to one of our other long-term monitoring species, which is the mountain goat. So I guess let me back up before I move on to that slide. So we are really fortunate here in Glacier to be surrounded by one of the largest intact native populations of mountain goats. And for the fact that you can get such nice access to these goats, that allows, you know, almost probably a significant portion of the visitors here to have a direct experience with this creature. And all of the majestic things that it can do, like full pull-ups with its front legs to get itself up onto the next ledge. So we wanted to know more about how the population was doing. So in 2008, we started this project, and the impetus was, you know, we really just don't know about our goats on a park-wide scale. I heard that you guys had Doug Chadwick speaking recently, and he was one of the first pioneers of mountain goat research here in Glacier. He looked at mountain goats in a portion of the park that encompassed Sperry, Logan Pass, down to up to like Otokomi Lake and kind of the core of the park. But nobody had really looked at, you know, the northwest portion of the park or the southeast portion and kind of the less core areas to understand better how goats were doing. And nobody had done work since his work was done in the 80s. We also were concerned about goats because we had seen, and working with the state, gotten their reports of declines of significant magnitude in the Bob Marshall, up to 85% declines in some of the areas of the Bob Marshall. And then also we were doing counts at the Walton Goat Lick. So the Walton Goat Lick is a place where the mountain goats come to lick the minerals that naturally occur in the rocks as a way to supplement their horn growth and some of the physiological processes they need for digesting vegetation. So that's a really good place to go kind of get an index count of mountain goats because they come there in great numbers in the spring. So at the Walton Goat Lick, people were counting the mountain goats and saw a pretty significant decline over about a decade there as well. So in 2008, that led us to say, what do we know? What do we know about this species? Are they doing okay? You know, should we be monitoring them more closely? So we decided, well, citizen science has been working fairly well for loons. At least we have lots of people involved and we're learning a lot. Can we do this for mountain goats? Mountain goats are notoriously difficult to study because they don't hang out in easy places to get to. And we know that people get out there in the park and see them all over the place. We get lots of cool pictures, lots of reports. Let's see if we can get people to help us with this species. And another reason that we decided to try citizen science as a way to track mountain goats was because the gold standard for tracking mountain goats is to do aerial surveys. And we have done some of them here and they're really helpful. But the problems with aerial surveys are that they're really expensive. They can be disruptive. Maybe not nobody, but a lot of people don't love to hear a helicopter flying over them when they're having a wilderness experience. And the park tries to minimize how much helicopter use happens here. And then the other problem is that the goats don't like the helicopters, so they oftentimes make themselves scarce. So it can be really hard to know how many you're missing. And if you're only going out one time in a helicopter to count mountain goats, you don't have what is called detection probability. So you don't know what percentage of the population you're not seeing on any given day, which is important because you can use that information to scale up your count into an actual population estimate. So what we knew was that ground counts were an alternative to aerial surveys, and citizen scientists could be a really good source for ground counts. So we started this work in 2008, training people to go out with spotting scopes and binoculars to specific points at 37 sites throughout the park and try to go to each of those sites 3 times, again, to get detection probability. So going to the sites repeatedly to see how many you see the first time, the second time, and the third time, it gives you that detection probability of how many you're seeing versus how many you're not seeing. And so we trained people to do that work, to get out there and do those surveys. We launched the program in 2008 and said, okay, this is something we might need to do for a long time. Like if we really want to know how our population is doing over time, this is long-term monitoring. Let's make sure it works before we invest year after year into this project. So in 2009, we looked at a 3-way comparison between volunteers doing the ground counts, biologists doing what would represent the same amount of work that they could do given the money and time, and then aerial surveys. And this is the result here. So volunteers and biologists, you can see that the count from biologists was a little bit higher because the eye is a little more trained and we do have the ability to pick out that search image a little better. But because biologists could get out so much less often, the range, so the range are those bars around the dot where the biologist is. So if you look at, we got the volunteer biologist aerial surveys as the observer types on the x-axis, and then the y-axis is the density estimate in terms of number of mountain goats per square kilometer. So the biologist estimate's a little higher, but the range around that estimate is quite large. So large that if you're looking at this as a way to monitor trend over time, you're not going to be able to distinguish whether you're seeing a real change or a change just because of the range around your estimate. But we did see that there was pretty good overlap in that estimate. And then if you go over and look at the aerial survey estimate, we saw that the range and the actual estimate of mountain goats per square kilometer for aerial surveys and volunteers was almost exactly the same. So that led us to say, maybe this is a viable method, and because it engages the public, it's something that we can get lots of people out doing and have no problem getting the replicates we need to do this trend monitoring over time. Let's keep going. And so it has remained since 2008 as our primary form of population trend monitoring for mountain goats. And we've also been able to look at distribution of mountain goats across the landscape. So this little map on the right there goes from yellow being the lowest density to blue being the highest density and shows how the mountain goats distribute across the landscape, which has been really helpful because it allows us to look at changes over time to see if we're losing any portions of the population or seeing increases in portions of the population across the park. So then we wanted to know, okay, can we use this for trend monitoring? So I'm going to walk you through some work that we did where we looked at all of our data from 2008 through 2019, this work we completed last year. And just to give you a sense of the data that went into that. So from that time frame, we've had just under 2,000 surveys. This is, again, up to 2019. So now we probably have almost closer to 2,500 surveys that we've done over the time frame we've been monitoring goats. We average about 147 surveys per year. You can see 2009 was a pretty big year because that was the year we were doing that 3-way comparison. So there was a lot of surveys being done in that year. But what's really cool is that we were able to get about 4 surveys at each site. So the goal was 3, but we usually get a little bit more than that. And only a couple of sites where there weren't surveys done. So in 2008, 2015, and 2016, there were a few sites with no surveys. And those are typically situations like, for example, you can't get up to Janet Lake, which is accessible from Waterton because you can't get across the border. I mean, that's something that's happened for the last couple of years. So, okay, so that's the data that went into this estimate, and here is the result. So what we're seeing here is on the x-axis are the years of our counts of mountain goats, And on the y-axis is the predicted number of goats per site. So that is the estimate being the dot, and then the range around the estimate of goats at each site throughout the park of those 37 sites. And what we're seeing is not great news. It's about a 45% decline over the time frame that we've been monitoring. We did wonder about the possibility that that big year of 2009, where we had so many surveys, whether that may have been changing the results. So we pulled that out of the analysis and looked at just 2010 to 2019, and we're still seeing about a 28% decline. So that begs the question of why and what next. So we're looking at some information about what sort of things might correlate that we might want to do additional research on to understand better what may be driving this change in the population. You know, whether or not there is a big cyclical change. We don't see very large cyclical changes in mountain goats like you would expect with something like a lynx snowshoe hare population, where you see pretty big fluctuations over time. So this definitely raises some alarm and makes us want to keep asking more questions. And it mirrors what is being seen throughout the mountain goat range in British Columbia, Washington, Alaska, and many of the other places where mountain goats are native. One of the other things we learned from this long-term analysis of looking at all that data is that there is a lot of benefit to keeping observers the people that are out there doing the mountain goat surveys, keeping them in the team. So having them trained and getting them skilled enough that they get good at seeing the mountain goats, and their ability to detect the mountain goats increases. And we see a sweet spot right around 10 surveys. So on the bottom axis there is the number of surveys that each observer has done, and then their detection probability of mountain goats. And so we want to keep people going for 10 years. And that is a really good testimony to why long-term monitoring matters. You need to keep people engaged and get them trained up well so that they can provide really good solid data that you can use to make management decisions. And then here is just one little kind of deep dive into one of the variables that came out as significant in understanding better what might be driving the declines we're seeing in mountain goats. So on the bottom axis, we're looking at the years, and then on the y-axis, we're looking at the growth rate. So that's the growth of number of mountain goats. So 1 being growth in the population, and anything below 1 being a decline. And then on the z-axis, the other one on the side there, is neonatal precipitation. So what that means is the amount of precipitation during the birthing period, which for mountain goats is around June. And so what you can see is that the change in the population of mountain goats tracks very closely to that spring precipitation time, which makes sense ecologically, because what happens is you get this birth pulse. All of the mountain goats give birth around the same time in that June timeframe, and the females have a huge energy demand to keep themselves fed so that they can nurse their babies and keep everybody healthy. So having good precipitation is important for the growth rate. And what we're seeing is that precipitation during the years of our trend monitoring has been low during neonatal birthing period. And so that has potentially contributed to the low growth rate and the decline in the population. So that's one thing that we're going to be looking at a little bit more closely and trying to track. Another thing that we would like to better understand that is going to be critical for understanding the context of those changes in the population is to understand the genetics of our mountain goats. So we have been trying to better understand, one, so if we know that our mountain goat population is declining by something on the order of 30 to 45%, what does that mean in terms of how many mountain goats that is? If we have, let's say 10,000 mountain goats, which we know we don't, that's way too many, but that's a smaller impact than if we have what our estimate was when we first started the project back in 2009, something closer to about 1,200. So that estimate is something that we, kind of ballparked from the average site estimate. So we need to better scale that up to understand what is the actual number of mountain goats in the park and how does that decline does that decline matter in terms of keeping a viable population? We know that if you get a species at too low of a number, you get inbreeding depression and lots of things that can cause physiological problems. So you look at something like a Tasmanian devil, you've got such a small number of them, or the mountain gorilla, which is a species that I just had an opportunity to see up close and personally. When you have that small of a population, you can see ill effects and loss of resilience. You don't want to see in a system where we're seeing already massive changes. I mean, you've got this beautiful white creature on a snowy landscape. We know that that snow is not always going to be there. So they're already experiencing a lot of change, and they need all the resilience that they can get to survive that change. And so we want to make sure that genetically they have that resilience and that they have the ability to move across the landscape, which we can tell through genetics whether or not they're successfully moving across the landscape to breed with one another. So the way that we are doing that is poop. Everyone poops. And it turns out that when you poop, you leave a little bit of yourself behind, a little DNA signature in the form of skin cells. And we have lots of people going into all sorts of parts of mountain goat habitat that are excited to collect poop and get on mountain peaks and find where the mountain goats have been bedding down and bring that back to us so that we can do genetic analysis to understand the population structure, whether or not our mountain goats are successfully moving across the landscape and interbreeding, and how many the minimum population is that are needed to keep the population genetically viable and resilient. And look how fun it is. Collecting poop makes you very happy. It honestly does, because it's much harder to find than we expected. It's not like you just find poop everywhere you look. You have to look pretty hard. You have to cover lots of miles. And when you finally find it, it's like a treasure hunt. So here's a map of all the places that people were successful at finding mountain goat pellets last year. And we are now running that analysis to look at the genetic population structure, which we're really excited to share with everybody when we get that information back. And because poop is so fun to collect, we're going to expand on that next year with the Pika Pellet Patrol. We've toyed with all sorts of different P alliteration terms, but this is the one that stuck. So if you're not familiar with pikas, this is a pika. They're a member of the lagomorph, or the rabbit family, that lives in the alpine. They stay up all winter eating off of hay piles that they bury under talus fields, and they make this adorable sound that makes you laugh almost every time you hear it. So we are concerned about this species because of their ecological niche being this only thing that's up and about in the winter, hanging out in the winter habitat, which means that they have this great snowy blanket covering them. But if that snowy blanket leaves too early in the spring, before there's a lot of vegetation growth, they're left vulnerable. Or if it gets too hot in the summer, they have a very limited tolerance for heat, and they can die from that heat exposure. So we're teaming up with a team that did baseline research in 2010 and did a mapping and monitoring effort of pikas across the park. They're going to come back and look at the current status of the pikas in all of those locations and their abundance. And then we're going to expand on that work by collecting pellets to get DNA from the pikas in these locations throughout the park to see, again, whether or not we have connectivity in our population and whether or not there's resilience in that population. We've also learned a lot in the interim since this work. We started doing citizen science on pikas as well in 2008. And since that time, we've learned a lot about the fact that there is 5 different subspecies of pikas that have very different tolerances to types of habitat, temperatures, and ecological change. And so we'd like to know a little bit more about where ours fall in that spectrum. So that's what it looks like. So pikas run around collecting these cute little bouquets in their mouth, and then they leave these little peppercorns behind next to where they store their bouquets of, which are called hay piles. And so we'll have people out collecting those and bringing them back to do DNA analysis. Okay, so that is an upcoming project. An ongoing project is our Hawk Watch program. So this is a project where we get to track migrating raptors that fly over the Continental Divide. We're super fortunate to be on a primary corridor for golden eagles. We get golden eagles streaming through the park over the Continental Divide. So they come down from the Canadian Rockies and then continue all the way south down to where they migrate into Texas, as far as like northern Mexico, and then places a little further north than that. And we are on a primary flyway. We can get as many as 400 in a day. I think our highest number was just over 400 of these creatures flying over in a day. So we do monitoring at Mount Brown. So that's what that picture is up in the top side. And then also down at Lake McDonald Lodge. So it's a great opportunity for people either who love to hike far and up super steep hills to come and get an up close and personal look at golden eagles, or for people who like to sit in a parking lot and watch. What's really cool about the Lake McDonald site is that you get to see the whole flyway. So you watch them coming in from much further north, and then which way they, you know, kind of veer off to the east and west once they get further south of us. And here's just some of the numbers from last year. So this is a graph showing the various different raptor species, and then the pie chart on the, I don't know if it's reverse for you guys, but for me it's on the right, breaks out some of the species that are in smaller abundance. But the key takeaway here is our golden eagle numbers in 2022 were the highest that we've ever had. We had 3,064 migrating golden eagles flying over our site. And our peak day was October 15th, where we had 284 raptors, 261 of which were golden eagles. So we didn't get a 400 golden eagle day this year. We had such good weather and favorable migration conditions. We didn't have crazy smoke like we've had in previous years. So the eagles got to kind of just like spread out and take their time and come in nice waves instead of all compressing and going all at once. So that's Hawkwatch. Again, that happens September, October for anybody who's interested in looking at birds and seeing one of the great spectacles of life. And then we also do biodiversity discovery. So we know that in national parks, about 80 to 90% of organisms remain undiscovered. There's all sorts of opportunity out there for understanding better what we protect here in these national parks. We also know that 1 in 6 species will likely become extinct as climate continues to change. And so it's really important to discover the biodiversity of parks while it's still here. So we've done, this is pictures from our fungus bioblitz that we did. We do an alpine bird bioblitz frequently. We've done aquatic invertebrate bioblitzes where you get to see crazy organisms like this water scorpion that's in that picture with the white background. And then we've done butterfly bioblitzes as well. And next year in July, and so actually that's this year, it's 2023 already. So in July of this year, we'll be doing something that I think is going to be really cool to understand better about Glacier's night shift. Oh, whoops, I forgot. I wanted to also say that if I ever get my way, I'm sure this would be hard to fund, but I'd love to do a slime mold bioblitz because slime molds are one of the most fascinating creatures. They're the missing link. And if anybody spent time in the park in the spring last year, you probably saw these everywhere. It was like a banner year for slime molds. I was so excited.
I'm all in. If we can sell poop, we can sell mold.
So next year we'll be doing the nocturnal pollinators bioblitz, Glacier's night shift. And so the reason that we're doing that is because we know almost nothing about nocturnal pollinators, and they hold such a special niche in the park. They are important food for bats. We know that we have an incredible diversity of bat species here that hold a very important ecological role. This is their primary food source. And we know very little about what species we have, how common they are. We also know that some of them are very critical for like bear foods, for example. We've got the army cutworm moth that provides one of the most lipid-rich sources of food for bears that we're just now starting to learn quite a lot more about them as well. So the way that the nocturnal pollinators bioblitz will work is there are these light sheets. So that picture in the upper left there is a lighted sheet. You put those out right at dark, and the moths are really attracted to them so that you can come in and start pulling them off and seeing what kind of diversity you have. And then we have these bucket traps as well as another way to do it. And then there's also some work in the daytime, just looking at, there's some moths that will estivate during the day. And it's not only moths that are in the nocturnal pollinator category. We've got lacewings. There's all sorts of other creatures that we'll be discovering as well, but moths will be the biggest show on the scene. And yeah, I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, well, moths, they're brown, right? They're these fuzzy brown things. They eat my clothes. What's the big deal? But there's also incredibly beautiful moths out there, and moths that hold an incredibly important ecological role. This is a sphinx moth. I don't know if some of you had the opportunity. So in 2003, we had the big fire season where we had about 10% of the park burn. And in 2004, what that meant was that a lot of the areas that burnt got revegetated with fireweed, just fields and fields of fireweed. And sphinx moths love fireweed. So there were places where you could walk down a trail and there were so many sphinx moth caterpillars that it was kind of intimidating. And they play a role when there's that many of anything in nutrient cycling. So they're eating the leaves off the plants, dropping their poop, and they're actually allowing revegetation to occur in those fire scarred areas. So doing something to kind of help keep that cycle going. And we need to understand more about them. So we're really excited to get people engaged in this project in July as another way to explore Glacier after dark. And then we also do projects where we partner with outside organizations and researchers. So this is something that we've kind of really expanded on in the last few years to keep increasing our capacity. So we have, for example, a researcher like the Behavioral Ecology Project for Bighorn Sheep, who comes from an outside organization and wants to do research to understand better whether you can use citizen science to detect disease prevalence in bighorn sheep. And we can provide research design support for that, as well as people, boots on the ground to help them do that kind of work and test out the viability of citizen science for that method. We also collaborate with the National Park Service's Air Quality Division, and each year collect samples for the Dragonflies and Mercury Project, which looks at the prevalence of mercury in dragonflies, which are also a top-level predator in the aquatic ecosystem. And it's a really cool project to engage students in and Montana Conservation Corps type groups, because if you've ever seen a dragonfly larva, they're kind of like this crazy alien creature that you never knew existed. And so it's always a kind of a mind-blowing experience for people. And then we also work with the Flathead Rivers Alliance, who is doing river recreation monitoring to look at the use of our beautiful Flathead River 3 branches and see how much recreational use is happening on those places. So yeah, we've been really excited to be able to expand our knowledge to other organizations and help get other projects started so that we can increase our capacity without having to have too many more staff. And then we're continuing to build on the opportunities that exist out there for DIY, do-it-yourself citizen science. So somebody asked about eBird. We always encourage people who are good birders to log their bird species on eBird, because that is a source of data that is used by the Cornell folks, and they map bird prevalence across the world and have done some really cool things with looking at, migration times and just trend over time. So eBird is a great thing that we try to encourage, and we're continuing to find good applications for it. iNaturalist is another app that anybody out there can use. Anytime you're in the park, you see something cool, you upload this app called iNaturalist, and you can take a picture of it and then send it out to the world, and they'll help you identify what you're seeing and then log it in the Global Biodiversity Information Database. And then we also have the Huckleberry Phenology Citizen Science Project that is another mobile data collection app. We have a video and a total do-it-yourself platform for that. So you can basically download all the information that you need, go hike any trail, and every hour stop and see whether huckleberries are present as a way to refine a predictive map of where bear foods are present across the landscape that is being used by USGS. So that is it. That's what I wanted to share, kind of the breadth of the work that we've been doing and some of what we found so far. If you're interested in learning more about our work, that's the email address. You can send us an email and we'll give you more information about the specific projects and put you on our inquiry list if you're interested in participating next year. Thanks again, as always, to the Glacier National Park Conservancy for your unwavering support that has provided us the opportunity to keep this work going since 2006, and to the many dedicated citizen scientists who make this happen.
Well, thank you, Jami. This is amazing. And we've got some time for questions, which is awesome. I want to thank you also for giving a shout out to our friends at the Glacier National Park Volunteer Associates. If you didn't get enough of Jami tonight, GNPVA hosts a winter speaker series, and Jami is going to be their speaker on February 27th, and they also have one on March 27th about the Going to the Sun Road. Bill Dakin is going to be giving that one. They're both at the Northwest Montana History Museum at 7:00 p.m. And we couldn't do this work without the work we do without our partners at both the Institute and the Volunteer Associates. I'm a member of the Volunteer Associates. All of us at the Conservancy participate in at least one Institute course every year. So it's kind of the three-legged stool that helps provide nonprofit support to the park. And I know we've got some great questions. I'm also going to do a giveaway. You'll notice I have my new Conservancy branded, I guess it's on this shoulder, coat epoxy jacket, and we're going to give away a coat epoxy fanny pack, and I've stuffed it with some of the stuff if you were hiking with me, that you would find in my pack. So that will go to a lucky winner here in a minute. But Amy, I know you've got some questions.
I do. Jami, you do such a great job of explaining everything. So it's just like such a pleasure to listen to you. And I feel like it makes everybody excited, including Carl, who has some great ideas for t-shirts, such as collecting poop makes you happy. So we've got some t-shirt ideas floating around. We'll see if we can make some of those happen.
Oh my gosh.
I know Margaret always asks great questions and is usually willing to unmute herself and just ask her question. Margaret, are you up for it tonight?
Sure, yeah, okay, I'll put my glasses on so I can read my question. Hi, Jami, it's good to see you, and that was absolutely wonderful. I was just wondering, I mean, what we're doing right now is building community with the Conservancy and across the swathe of people. I was wondering how you keep in touch with your citizen scientists. I mean, some of them are one-offs probably for a season, but do you feel like you've built a community, and do you think that they're going out there in the world doing advocacy and science and being inspired to spread the word, as it were, out there? I mean, do you think that this program is having ripple effects beyond actual data collection and science as well?
That's a really good question. Yeah. It's something that I don't know that we can necessarily track other than anecdotally just hearing what people say to us. But some things that we see really often are people, like I was riding my bike up the road last year just on my day off and ran in, kind of came up behind some of our citizen scientists sharing with the public about what they were seeing out there with the mountain goats, helping them spot mountain goats, helping them understand the significance of that species and, what we are protecting here, why they're so precious. Seeing people talk to the park visitors out there that get too close to the lake edge when you've got breeding loons and ask them to, have the ability to be a little bit more respectful and back up, and doing it in such a way that you can tell that their passion shines through because they have not only intellectual understanding of the species, but now a relationship because they get to go out and see for themselves. I don't know. I mean, there's been some really cool work out there on the role of citizen science in getting people to do more environmental work or more civic engagement. And so there is usually a pretty good correlation, but I don't know that we have that kind of data to support that that's happening. But I believe one of the really cool things that we see is over time, the type of questions that our citizen scientists ask us gets so much more insightful and complex the more that they learn, because they're learning for themselves often things that we ourselves don't know anything about. They're kind of expanding on the knowledge, and I think really increasing their science literacy and understanding of how ecological research works.
Yeah, wonderful, thanks.
Yeah, I see Doug here. I mean, we even have people like Doug Bonham, who's just below you, at least on my screen, that has basically started up his own citizen science project looking at the Walton Goat Lick. So there's also that kind of, do-it-yourself engagement in citizen science that we're starting to see a lot of. We've got another volunteer who's taken it upon himself to photograph all of the butterflies in the herbarium and develop a biodiversity record of that as well. So there's lots of cool work going on.
Thanks, Jami. Thanks.
I see that John has our next question, and John has his camera on. I'm wondering if he's willing to unmute and ask.
Sure. Hey, everyone. So yeah, I guess my question was, with the significant decline in numbers of the goat population during those first few years, I'm wondering if the numbers were the increased knowledge of the scientists that are counting those numbers. They're getting more skilled at accounting numbers, if that's what's counting for some of that significant decline. Does that make
Yeah,
sense? So
I
as
do.
they
I see
get
what
better,
I
yeah.
see what you're asking. Yep. So in 2008 and 2009, we had more biologists involved in the counts. And so I think
Mhm.
what you're asking is whether or not that may have inflated the counts overall. But when we did the analysis, looking at the trend over time, we pulled those biologist counts out.
Sure. I guess beyond those, the biologists, I'm talking about the citizens. They're getting more skilled as they're doing it from year to year. You're keeping those same people on year to year, because I saw
Yeah.
the numbers seem to level out just a little bit after the first 4 or 5 years. It was just a thought. I mean, the decline of any kind is something of concern. I'm just wondering why there was such a significant decrease in that first, 5 years or so.
No, it's a really good question and something we're looking at pretty closely. Unfortunately, we don't have, it would be really great if we could look at, 1999 to 2008, because then I think we could put it in better context. But at this point, I think the big question is, what do we need to know to make sure that we're not waiting for the next big decline to happen before we start to take action? So trying to keep expanding on what we know so far.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. A couple more, Jamie, if you're up for it. Eric and Tanya again are asking, with the fecal collection, any plans to look at diet or microbiome as variables impacting goat or pica populations?
Microbiome would be really cool. We have not done anything with that yet, but I did see a research project where somebody was looking at the gut microbiome of picas, and I think that would be really fascinating, because we have seen some other research suggesting that that is a sign of stress and lack of resilience. Is you can detect that from the gut microbiome. What we are looking at with our mountain goats is we're using the fresh, like real fresh stuff that we've collected to look at stress hormones to see if there's any relationship between level of habituation and stress that the goats carry around, so that we can understand better how we might manage for that. We're also looking at nutrition. So we're doing what's called metabarcoding. So looking at the species found within the poop and correlating that with the database of barcodes of DNA from all of the plants that are known to exist in this area to see what they're eating. So we are looking at nutrition that way. Right now, we don't have plans to look at nutrition or hormone stress analysis with the picas, but we're still fleshing out that project to see what we can fit within the funding and what's going to be the most important indicators. And I think probably what will happen, so we did do a pilot project 2 years ago where we collected about 60 samples of poop over a 3-day public engagement effort and got really good extraction rates of the DNA. So we're able to get individual IDs in about 85% of the samples that we got, which was pretty awesome. So now that we have that information, we can design our study to better understand how to get as many samples as we need. And then with that first year, I think we'll get a better sense of what are the most important questions to ask with poop that you have in your hands. Because once you have a sample in your hands, you might as well do as much as you can with it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think Eric commented that Eric and Tanya commented stress hormone work is super cool. Let's see, one more. George, and this may have been answered in one of your slides. He just commented, great park specific projects, but do you participate in City Nature Challenge, in the City Nature Challenge?
I'm not familiar with the City Nature Challenge. So no, but I would love to know more about it.
And then just a reminder to everybody, we did put the email address where you can you can send an email to Citizen Science or go to their website to find out more about the opportunities. Typically, Jami, trainings happen end of May, beginning of June-ish for some of the high alpine stuff, and then we'll go on throughout the summer.
Correct. Yeah, we do our trainings for loons actually as the first round in May, and then the mountain goats and pikas will happen more in June, once we can get into the high country. And then we do our trainings for the Hawk Watch program in August. And
And I
again,
know
will be
I know we're a little bit over, but I pre-warned our guest that we were going to, in fact, do a Doug Mitchell speed round tonight. So, Jami, I have 5 questions for you. Are you ready?
ready.
Okay. When it comes to fall colors, larch or aspen? Larch or aspen?
Oh, that's not fair.
Understood.
Larch.
Okay, we're going to go larch. All right, that's the right answer. When it comes to winter running, outside or treadmill?
Outside.
Outside, okay, very good.
Screws in your shoes.
I understand it's an interesting line in a biography, but I read in reading up about you today that you enjoy eating fruits. So I'm going to go with the fruit theme, raspberries or strawberries?
Ooh, raspberries.
Raspberries, very good. Now
Unless they're wild strawberries.
I did pre-read that there would be a pie question. And I hope I've gotten 2 good choices for you. Huckleberry or rhubarb?
Rhubarb.
Rhubarb, okay. That's a Mitchell family favorite, by the way. And there's lots of it right down the road here. If you need any rhubarb, just call me. And then next Sunday is Super Bowl, Eagles or Chiefs?
You caught me there.
You
I
know,
don't know, but-
you do have a bird out here.
right. I'm like definitely Eagles since
Very good, very good. Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much. And I have good news for my colleague at Yellowstone Forever. Grace, this fanny pack, complete with Doug Mitchell items inside, is headed your way in Bozeman. Please say hello to Lisa Beekman for me when you see her. And Jami Belt, thank you so much. I know that you mean so much to all of us at the Conservancy, I know, and to this park and the people who love it, and the way that you are building up this program in a way that is training up the next generation of land stewards, is really helping fulfill our mission, which put simply is to preserve and protect Glacier National Park for future generations. So thank you for being a vibrant part of that leadership and for sharing an evening away from your 2 boys with us tonight. And to all of you, thank you again for another great Glacier conversation together. And we'll look forward to seeing you all soon at a book club or a Glacier conversation, or who knows, maybe even out and about, now that it seems like that's getting to be more popular. So again, Jami, thank you, and thank you all, and have a great night. Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jami.
Thank you.